H. My sister demanded her boyfriend's brother get my room while I was away at school. My parents agreed. H. I came home to a stranger in my bed. Left without a word. Stopped paying. H. They panicked when they found out who was actually funding the mortgage. That's the summary of the disaster. H. But living it felt sharper. I steered my sedan onto the cracked concrete of my parents' driveway, the engine cutting out. H. Peeling paint and overgrown grass greeted me, a stark contrast to the controlled whirl I managed. H. I grabbed my leather weekender from the seat. At 28, I managed commercial developments, yet here I was, H, sweating over a simple family visit. For 4 years, I'd been the invisible pillar holding this roof up. Every month, H. $1,000 left my account to quietly subsidize their mortgage, a fact my father conveniently ignored. H. I checked my reflection in the window. I needed this weekend to be peaceful. H. I desperately needed the sanctuary of my old room to decompress before the conference began. The front door unlocked with a familiar click. Inside, the air was thick with the savory scent of Mom's pot roast. Esh. A smell that usually triggered comfort. H. I heard laughter bubbling from the kitchen. Natalie's high, pitched giggle mixed with the television's drone. It felt domestic. H. Lulling me into a false sense of security. I didn't announce my arrival. Instead, I ghosted up the stairs. H. Eager to change out of my suit. The hallway was dark, but the strip of light under my bedroom door beckoned me forward. I pushed the door open, expecting the sterile order of my childhood desk. Instead, the stench of stale energy drinks hit me. H. My eyes adjusted to the dim light and my stomach dropped. A stranger was passed out in my bed. H. He was tangled in a cheap gray duvet that wasn't mine. His mouth open, snoring softly. He looked about 20, wearing a dirty tank top. My brain stuttered, trying to process the violation. This wasn't a guest room. This was my private space, and it was occupied. It wasn't just the intruder. The room itself had been surgically altered. I stepped inside, dress shoes silent on the carpet. H. My mahogany bookshelf, built with my grandfather, was gone. I turned toward the closet and saw it shoved violently inside. The H tilted at a dangerous angle to make room for a massive gaming monitor setup. Cables snaked across the floor like vines. My trophies were in a trash bag in the corner. They hadn't just borrowed the room, they had erased me from it completely. H. A heat rose in my chest, not explosive, but cold and vibrating. I snapped a single photo of the sleeping squatter. I didn't wake him. I didn't scream. I simply backed out of the room and closed the door with a soft click. The laughter downstairs continued. H. Uninterrupted and mocking. They thought I was the reliable checkbook, the silent partner in their comfort. Esh! I gripped the handle of my bag until my knuckles turned white. It was time to introduce them to reality. I walked down the stairs, H, ensuring my footsteps were heavy enough to register. The kitchen was a snapshot of unearned comfort. Mom stood at the stove, humming while stirring gravy, while Natalie set the table with the good silver. Her boyfriend, Brian, leaned against the fridge nursing a beer like he owned the appliance. Danny was slumped at the counter, scrolling on his phone. They looked up, smiles faltering slightly at my expression. The warmth of the room felt suffocating now. There is a stranger sleeping in my bed, I said, my voice flat. Mom didn't even turn around, just kept stirring. Oh, that's Kevin, she said breezily. Natalie's friend. H. He needed a place to crash for a few weeks. She said it with the casual tone one uses for borrowing a cup of sugar, not commandeering a room. Natalie chimed in, not looking up from her task. Yeah, he's going through a rough patch. Don't be weird about it, James. I stared at my sister. She was wearing a sweater I had bought her for her birthday. H. You gave my room to a random guy without asking me, I asked. Natalie finally met my eyes, rolling hers. You don't live here, James. You visit like once a month. The room was just sitting empty. Her logic was twisted, a knot of entitlement I couldn't untangle. To her, my absence forfeited my ownership. My sanctuary was merely wasted square footage. My stuff is in there, I countered, H, keeping my hands in my pockets to hide the tremor. My books, my desk. Mom finally turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel. We packed it up, she said soothingly. It's all safe in the garage. We labeled the boxes. The garage. The damp, uninsulated garage where Dad stored rusty tools and old paint. My limited edition prints and college diplomas were currently soaking up humidity next to the lawnmower. Where is Dad? I asked. H, needing the one person who might understand the financial reality. Working late, Mom said, turning back to the stove. Shh. He'll be back by 8. Just wash up for dinner, honey. Kevin wakes up around 7. The dismissal was absolute. H. They expected me to sit down, break bread with the invaders, and accept my displacement. Danny finally looked up. Dude, chill. It's just temporary. You can sleep on the couch. I turned to leave, but Brian pushed off the fridge. He was a guy I'd met twice. Shh. Yet he felt comfortable lecturing me. Look, man, he said, stepping into my personal space. Kevin got evicted. He had nowhere else to go. It's pretty selfish to complain about a room you don't use when someone is practically homeless. The audacity stole the air from my lungs. The boyfriend of the sister I subsidized was calling me selfish in the house I paid for. I looked at them, really looked at them. Mom, H, stirring the pot roast I paid for. Natalie, judging me in the clothes I bought. Brian, drinking the beer I likely funded. I am not staying, I said quietly. Mom paused. Don't be silly. You have the conference. I'll find a hotel, I replied. H, I turned my back on the warmth and the smells. The bridge wasn't just burned, they had unknowingly rigged it with explosives. Shh. I walked out the door. I drove to the nearest chain hotel, my hands gripping the wheel tight enough to ache. H, the adrenaline from the confrontation had turned into a violent tremor in my fingers. H. I parked between 2 rental cars and walked into the sterile, fluorescent, lit lobby. H. The clerk offered a rehearsed smile and asked if I was here for business or pleasure. Business. I lied. H. Sliding my credit card across the marble counter. It felt easier than explaining I had just been effectively evicted from my own life. H, room 314 smelled of lemon polish and industrial carpet cleaner. It was impersonal and cold. H, exactly what I needed after the suffocating warmth of my parents' kitchen. H. I threw my bag onto the stiff mattress and sat at the small wooden desk. My laptop hummed to life. Shh. the screen casting a pale blue glow on my face. I wasn't here to sleep. I was here to correct a 4-year accounting error. H. The silence in the room felt heavy, waiting for the strike. I navigated to my bank's website, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The login page loaded, asking for my credentials. I typed the password. H, a complex string I changed every 90 days. My family didn't understand security. They only understood handouts. I clicked enter, and my dashboard populated with green numbers and orderly graphs. This was my domain. Here, inputs equaled outputs. H. There were no emotional debts, only mathematical ones. The math was about to change drastically. I clicked on the Scheduled Transfers tab. There it was, sitting at the top like a malignant tumor, Dad's mortgage help. $1,000 scheduled for the first of every month. I expanded the history view, scrolling down past 2023, 2022, into the depths of 2020. 8 months of payments lined up in a neat, expensive row. $48,000. That was a down payment on a condo, a luxury car, a life. Instead, it was the price of my family's ignorance. I remembered the call from Dad 4 years ago. He had been weeping, his pride shattered, begging for a lifeline to save the family home. I had felt a crushing weight of duty then, a son's obligation to protect the tribe. Today, that memory soared. The weeping man had become the arrogant father who couldn't be bothered to protect my property. The duty I felt evaporated, replaced by the icy clarity of a business decision. They had broken the contract first. My cursor hovered over the trash can icon next to the transfer. Cancel recurring transaction. It was such a small button for such a massive detonation. For a second, my finger froze on the trackpad. I thought about Mom's pot roast in the house where I learned to walk. Then I thought about my bookshelf in the damp garage and the stranger drooling on my pillow. The hesitation died. I pressed down. The click sounding like a gunshot in the quiet room. A confirmation window popped up, demanding verification. Are you sure you want to cancel this transfer? I clicked.
Yes.
Then, a text box appeared. Optional reason for cancellation. My fingers hovered over the keys again. I typed the word. Eviction. It felt petty, too emotional for a ledger. I backspaced until the field was empty. Silence was better. Let them wonder why the money stopped. Let them panic in the void. I closed the laptop, leaving the screen black. I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early, securing a booth in the back corner. The smell of roasted beans and burnt milk hung in the air, a sharp contrast to the sterile hotel room I had just left. Dad walked in right on time, wearing his faded work jacket. He looked older under the harsh morning light, gray stubble lining his jaw. He didn't order anything. He just slid into the booth opposite me, his eyes tired but accusing. He was ready to lecture me, not listen. Your mother was crying all night? He started, skipping the pleasantries. James, you can't just storm out like that over a misunderstanding. It's childish. He drummed his calloused fingers on the table, a nervous tic I remembered from childhood. Kevin needed help. We raised you to be generous, not possessive over empty space. The irony was so thick I could taste it. He was lecturing me on generosity while living a life subsidized by my paycheck. H, completely unaware of the financial beam supporting his own ceiling. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, letting the silence stretch until he fidgeted. Dad, how much is the mortgage payment? He blinked. H, thrown off by the sudden lane change in the conversation. What does that have to do with anything? He asked, defensive. H, just answer the question. How much is the monthly payment right now? He sighed, frustrated by my stubbornness. It's $1,900. The bank modified it 4 years ago. You know this. Ch. Why are we talking about money? And how much of that $1,900 comes out of your account? I asked softly. He frowned. H, looking at me like I was speaking a foreign language. All of it. I pay the mortgage, James. H, I've paid it every month since I got back on my feet. His confidence was genuine, which made it worse. He truly believed his own mythology. He thought he was the provider, the captain of the ship. H, he had no idea I was the one keeping the hull from breaching. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. H, I slid it across the sticky table. Look at the transaction history, Dad. He squinted at the screen, reading the lines. Transfer, mortgage assistance, $1,000. I scrolled up and up. Month after month of transfers. You pay $900, Dad. Hey, I pay $1,000. The bank didn't modify the loan to $1,900. They kept it at $2,900. H, I've been covering the gap for 4 years. The color drained from his face faster than I thought possible. His mouth opened. H, but no sound came out. He looked from the phone to me, his eyes wide with a dawning horror. I thought the automatic payments just handled it. He stammered, his voice trembling. I never checked the details. Aish. I just saw the balance work out. He had lived in a comfortable fog of willful ignorance. Now, the fog was lifting. H, revealing the jagged rocks underneath. You didn't check because you didn't want to know, I said, taking my phone back. H, that money paid for Natalie's clothes and Danny's gaming habit. It paid for the stranger sleeping in my bed. I stood up. H, buttoning my jacket. I canceled the transfer last night. The H, you have until the 1st of the month to find that missing $1,000. I left a $5 bill on the table for the coffee. H, Dad didn't move. He just sat frozen, staring at the empty space where my phone had been. H, the following 3 days were a blur of conference seminars and vibrating glass. My phone sat on the mahogany podium as I presented a retail development strategy, buzzing incessantly with incoming calls. Natalie, Mom, and even Danny were taking turns hammering my sanity. I kept my phone on silent, watching the names flash like warning lights. H. They had clearly moved past the confusion stage and were deep into the frantic bargaining that precedes a total collapse. H. I finally checked my messages during a lunch break. Natalie had sent a string of 15 texts, ranging from pleading to vitriolic. H. You're really going to let us lose the house over a stupid bedroom? She had typed. Then 5 minutes later. I'm sorry. Okay. H. We'll move Kevin out today. It was too late for apologies. The room was just the symptom. Their parasitic entitlement was the disease. They still didn't understand that the money was gone. The most disturbing message came from a number I didn't recognize. Hey man. Shh. It's Brian. Look, you're stressing everyone out. Just turn the transfer back on, and we can talk like adults. I deleted it immediately. H. The audacity of Natalie's boyfriend inserting himself into my financial life was staggering. He was protecting his own comfort, knowing that if my parents lost the house, his brother Kevin would be back on his couch. The stakes were finally visible. H. On Monday morning, the pressure escalated from digital to physical. I was reviewing blueprints in my home office when the buzzer for my building rang. The front desk concierge sounded apologetic over the intercom. Mr. James, your mother and sister are in the lobby. The H. They're very insistent on coming up. I felt a spike of cold dread. They had driven 3 hours to ambush me at my sanctuary. The fortress I built was under a direct siege. Tell them I'm not receiving visitors, I said, my voice steady despite the hammer in my chest. I watched the security feed on my tablet. Mom looked small and frayed. H. Clutching her purse, while Natalie paced the lobby like a caged animal. They stayed for 2 hours, sitting on the velvet benches. H. Hoping I would crack. They didn't realize that every minute they spent waiting only reinforced my resolve. A. Their presence here was just another boundary crossed. H. I went back to my desk and focused on a $45 million development project. The irony wasn't lost on me. Thatch. I was trusted to manage massive investments for strangers, yet my own family treated me like a broken vending machine. H. If I could navigate city planners and stubborn engineers, I could certainly handle 2 desperate women in a lobby. H. I turned off the tablet screen. The silence in my apartment felt like a hard-earned victory, expensive and rare. At 6 p.m., H. My phone chimed with a formal notification. It wasn't a text or a call, but an email from an address I recognized as a local law firm. The subject line, Reedy. Notice of intent to file breach of verbal contract. My father had stopped crying and started litigating. He was trying to sue me for the very money I had gifted them out of love. The final tie was officially severed. H. They had chosen war over family. The legal threat sat on my monitor like a dead bird. H. I stared at the formal letterhead of Miller and Associates, a firm that likely specialized in slip and fall cases. H. They were accusing me of breaching a verbal contract for lifelong maintenance. It was a clumsy attempt at extortion disguised as law. My father had reached into the family's dwindling savings to pay a retainer for a fight he could never win. The irony burned. Shh. He was using my past generosity to fund his current assault. I forwarded the document to Marcus. My former roommate and a rising star in contract law. He called me within 20 minutes, his voice punctuated by a sharp, incredulous laugh.
Is this a joke, James?
H. They're claiming an implied lifetime annuity based on a voluntary gift. He sounded more entertained than concerned. H. There is no signed agreement. There is no consideration. H. This is just a desperate bluff from a lawyer who needs a paycheck. His professional assessment provided a cold, necessary comfort against the familial fire. Marcus drafted a response that was a masterpiece of surgical precision. He didn't just deny the claims, he dismantled the logic with a sequence of dates and figures. H. The letter outlined 8 months of undocumented gifts totaling nearly $50,000. H. He noted that continued harassment would result in a countersuit for the unauthorized storage and potential damage to my property. H. We sent it via certified mail that afternoon. I felt a strange, hollow satisfaction as I watched the clerk stamp the envelope. H. 3 days later, the digital storm reached a fever pitch. Natalie began posting cryptic, tear-soaked videos on her social media. H. She spoke about a brother who turned his back on his parents during a medical crisis. I watched one from my balcony. H. The wind whipping against my face. She didn't mention the mortgage or the room. She only spoke of her own victimhood. H. She was weaponizing her followers to shame me into silence. It was a tactical error. It only deepened my resolve. H. Mom called from a blocked number on Tuesday evening. I answered, thinking it might be a genuine emergency. James, your father is in the hospital, she whispered. Her voice sounded thin, stretched to the breaking point. His blood pressure is through the roof. The stress is killing him. I closed my eyes and leaned against the cool glass of my window. It was the ultimate leverage. They were blaming my boundaries for his biology. They wanted me to feel like a murderer. I am sorry he is unwell, Mom, I said, keeping my voice as flat as possible. But his health is not a currency you can use to buy my bank account. There was a long, sharp silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her ragged breathing. How can you be so cold? She asked. We are your family. I thought about my bedroom, occupied by a stranger while I paid the bills. Family doesn't steal from their own, I replied. I hung up before she could respond. The guilt tried to claw at my throat, but I pushed it down with the facts. I had saved that house once. I had given them 4 years of stability they hadn't earned. If Dad was sick, it was from the weight of his own lies, not my withdrawal. I realized then that they would never stop. As long as I was a source of gold, I would be a target for their blame. The legal bluff evaporated by the end of the week. Miller and Associates sent a brief, one-paragraph letter withdrawing their intent to file. Apparently, Dad couldn't afford a second retainer once the first one ran out. Without my $1,000, their liquid cash was vanishing into daily expenses. Reality was finally setting in. They were realizing that a lawyer costs more than a mortgage payment. They were trapped in a cage of their own making. It was a quiet victory. Natalie showed up at my office on Friday afternoon. She didn't try to get past security this time. She waited by my car in the parking garage, looking tired and uncharacteristically small.
James, please,
she said as I approached. I broke up with Brian. Kevin is gone. She stepped toward me, her hands outstretched. We just need 1 month. Just to get through the hospital bills. It was a classic pivot. The anger was gone, replaced by the mask of the penitent sister. I looked at her and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, just a profound sense of exhaustion. You should have thought about that before you gave away my bed, Natalie, I said. I unlocked my car and climbed inside. The engine roaring to life in the concrete cavern. She stood there, illuminated by my headlights, a ghost of the sister I used to protect. As I drove away, I saw her pick up her phone to film another video. The cycle was never ending. The following Monday, the hammer finally fell on the family home. I received a notification from a real estate portal showing my childhood address had been listed for sale. The photos were a gut punch of forced staging and hollowed-out lives. I saw my parents' mismatched sofa pushed against the wall to create the illusion of space. The price was aggressive. A desperate attempt to capture enough equity to clear the bank before the next cycle. They were finally admitting that the ghost of my subsidy was never coming back to haunt them. Dad called me that afternoon from a new number I hadn't blocked yet. His voice was gravelly and lacked the heat of his previous legal threats. The realtor says we have to vacate in 30 days if the offer holds, he said. He sounded like a man who had finally stopped fighting the tide. There was no mention of the hospital or the lawsuit. He was just a father asking his son for a place to store his remaining pride. I listened to the silence on the line. Feeling the finality. I can't help you with the move, Dad, I said, my voice echoing in my quiet apartment. I have a project launch in the city. It was a lie, but a necessary one to prevent a physical reconnection. He didn't push back. He just let out a long, shuddering breath that broke my heart for a single second. I understand, he whispered. Your mother wants to know if you want your old trophies. Otherwise, they're going to the landfill. I told him to throw them away. I didn't need plastic gold. The house sold in record time to a developer who planned to gut the interior. It was a fitting end for a structure built on a foundation of secrets and unearned comfort. After the mortgage was settled and the agents took their cut, my parents were left with a small sum. It was enough for a modest rental and a basic cushion. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the train tracks. It was a place where the walls were thin and the neighborhood was loud. The era of the sprawling suburb was over. Natalie's life took the hardest hit once the free ride evaporated. Without the safety net of my childhood home, she had to take a second job waiting tables. She stopped posting videos about her curated lifestyle and started posting about the reality of rent. I saw a photo of her hands, red and chapped from industrial cleaning fluid. She looked older, the entitlement stripped away by the grind of 40-hour weeks. She was finally experiencing the life I had lived in my 20s. It was a brutal, necessary education for her. Danny vanished into the city, renting a room from a stranger who didn't care about his gaming achievements. He sent me a text asking for a loan to cover his first month's utility deposit. I didn't reply. I just archived the message and went back to my spreadsheets. He had to learn the value of $1 the hard way, just as I had. The family unit wasn't a team anymore. It was a collection of individuals, finally paying their own way. The silence from him was the most peaceful gift. I spent my Saturday packing the last of my things into a storage unit. I found a box from the garage that Mom had supposedly labeled neatly. Inside, my college diplomas were stuck together with mold. And my favorite books were warped by dampness. They hadn't protected my history, they had merely hidden it. I threw the ruined paper into a dumpster behind the facility. The past was literally rotting, and I felt a strange sense of relief as I let it go. My hands were dirty, but I was light. 6 months after the first missed payment, the dust finally settled on our broken family. I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. I was no longer the secret bank of a failing dynasty. I was just a man with a career and a quiet home. My phone sat on the table, silent and heavy. I had achieved the autonomy I wanted, but the cost was a total severance. I wondered if they ever sat in their small apartment and realized what they had actually traded away. A final message arrived from Mom as I was heading to bed. It wasn't a demand or a guilt trip this time. It was just a photo of a small pot roast sitting on a chipped dinner plate. "It's not the same without the big kitchen," she wrote. I didn't respond, but I felt the weight of the subtext. They were still looking back at the ghost of a house I had paid for. I looked at my own kitchen, sleek and cold. The stranger in my bed was gone, but so was everyone else. 1 year later, I stood in my new condo overlooking the river. The floor was dark oak, and the air was perfectly filtered. There were no boxes from the past here. I had finally purchased my own sanctuary with the money that used to vanish into my father's pockets. My life was a series of clean lines and predictable outcomes now. I worked, I ate, and I slept without the ghost of a secret debt. Freedom felt like silence, expensive and profound. My phone chimed on the granite counter. It was a notification from a professional networking site, not a family text. Natalie had updated her profile. She was no longer a boutique assistant, but a junior manager at a local diner. The entitlement had been burned away by a year of double shifts in reality. She looked exhausted in her new headshot. The spark of arrogance replaced by a weary grit. She was finally paying her own way through the world. Dad sent a short email that evening. He didn't ask for money or beg for a visit. He simply attached a photo of a small garden he had started on the balcony of their apartment. The tomatoes were small and struggling in the city light. "We are doing okay," he wrote. It was the first honest sentence he had ever sent me. He wasn't the provider anymore, just a man surviving. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete the message either. The lie I had lived for years was dead. I used to believe that my value was measured by the problems I solved for them. I thought my silence was strength. Now, I knew that boundaries were the only true form of love. They were functioning because they had to. Without my shadow funding their mistakes, they had found their own legs. It was a cold realization, but a necessary one. I was a son, not a silent bank. I walked to the window and watched the sunset. The orange light reflected off the glass of the skyscrapers I helped build. My hands were steady as I poured a glass of water. I thought about the stranger who had been in my bed. That moment of violation had been the catalyst for my liberation. It was the best thing Natalie ever did for me. By taking my room, she inadvertently gave me back my entire life and my future. I pulled out my tablet to check the morning schedule. A single legacy alert popped up on my screen. It was a reminder for a recurring transfer that no longer existed. My finger hovered over the delete button, but I paused. I looked at the old account number 1 last time, before swiping it into the trash. The screen flickered, then went dark. My phone began to vibrate with a call from a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring.